You probably think of ego as something mainly arrogant people have too much of. Real psychology describes something more universal and more useful to understand. A self-protection system almost everyone runs, constantly, mostly without noticing. And it's quietly costing people accuracy, growth, and relationships, precisely because it's designed to be invisible from the inside. 5 real mechanisms behind how the ego protects itself at your own expense. And one honest caveat, because the goal isn't having no ego, it's noticing when it's running the decision instead of you.
Self-serving bias. Psychologists Dale Miller and Michael Ross documented self-serving bias, the well-replicated tendency to attribute successes to internal factors, skill, effort, character, and attribute failures to external factors, bad luck, unfair circumstances, other people. This isn't occasional self-flattery. It's a consistent, automatic pattern in how information about yourself gets processed before you're even aware of the interpretation happening. The cost is specific. If failure is reliably explained away rather than examined, the actual information failure contains, what to do differently, never gets extracted. The ego stays comfortable. The learning doesn't happen.
The tell. Notice the asymmetry directly. Do your explanations for success and failure use the same standard of evidence? Or does one get scrutinized far more than the other? This bias doesn't just distort specific events, it inflates the whole self-image behind them. 2. Illusory superiority. Psychologist Ola Svenson's famous study asked drivers to rate their own skill relative to others. A large majority rated themselves above average, which is statistically impossible for a majority to be true. This better-than-average effect replicates across ability, morality, leadership, and honesty. Psychologists Shelley Taylor and Jonathan Brown described this as part of a broader pattern of positive illusions, mild, systematic self-enhancement that most people carry as a baseline. The uncomfortable part? This isn't a flaw limited to arrogant people. It's close to statistically universal, which means the confidence you feel in your own judgment, right now, on almost anything, is very likely inflated by a small but real, measurable margin, invisibly, because the illusion doesn't feel like an illusion from inside it. Here's where it gets more specific. The ego doesn't just inflate your self-image, it actively defends it against being corrected. 3. Self-verification theory. Psychologist William Swann's self-verification theory found something that seems to contradict simple self-enhancement. People are also strongly motivated to have their existing self-concept confirmed, even when that self-concept is negative. Someone who sees themselves as unlikable will sometimes unconsciously resist or discount genuine positive feedback because it conflicts with an identity that, however unflattering, feels stable and known. This reveals something important. Ego protection isn't only about feeling good, it's fundamentally about consistency. The ego will defend an inaccurate self-image in either direction, inflated or deep or deflated, because the actual threat isn't negativity, it's disruption to the story that's already settled. The tell? Notice if positive feedback gets deflected as quickly and automatically as criticism does. That's self-verification protecting the existing narrative, not modesty. That defense of the existing story gets even more expensive once a decision is already on the record. 4. Sunk cost and identity protective persistence.
The classic sunk cost research by Hal Arks and Catherine Bloomer found people persist with failing decisions specifically because they've already invested in them. But the deeper layer is often identity, not just resources. Reversing a decision doesn't just cost the original investment, it requires admitting to yourself, and often publicly, that the earlier version of you was wrong. For a self-image built around being right, capable, or decisive, that admission is what's actually being avoided. The continued investment is a side effect. This is why some people escalate commitment to a clearly failing choice, specifically when the failure becomes more visible to others, not less. The ego stakes just went up. The tell: if continuing to fail publicly is quietly preferable to fixing it privately, identity protection is running the decision, not the actual facts on the table. There's a specific version of this that determines whether someone can even tolerate being a beginner at anything. 5. Fixed mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on fixed versus growth mindset found that people who believe ability is a fixed trait, you're either smart or you're not, tend to avoid genuine challenge because struggling threatens the core identity directly. People with a growth mindset, who believe ability develops through effort, treat the same struggle as informative rather than threatening. This is ego protection applied to competence itself. If your identity is, "I'm good at this," a fixed mindset makes failure at it feel like discovering you were never who you thought you were. So the safer move becomes avoiding anything hard enough to risk that discovery. The one honest caveat. One distinction matters before closing this out. None of this means healthy self-regard or confidence is the problem. A stable, reasonably accurate sense of self-worth is genuinely protective, and trying to eliminate ego entirely isn't realistic or even desirable. The actual issue is specifically when self-image protection overrides accuracy, learning, or relationships that matter to you. There's also a version worth naming directly: an unstable, inflated self-image reacting aggressively when challenged. What researcher Roy Baumeister's work on threatened egotism, covered in an earlier video on bullying, identified as a stronger predictor of aggression than low self-esteem. That's the sharpest version of ego functioning as an actual enemy, not just a quiet bias. When protecting the self-image becomes worth damaging a relationship or hurting someone else over. Self-serving bias, illusory superiority, self-verification, identity protective persistence, fixed mindset. 5 different angles on the same underlying pattern. A self-image that would rather stay consistent and comfortable than be accurate. Most of the time, that trade is invisible, which is exactly what makes it worth checking for on purpose. If you want the practical follow-up, specific ways to catch your own ego protection in real time, let me know in the comments.